Today, I want to welcome Kevin Barona. He is the founder and CEO of Cycore Secure. They help folks become compliant in cybersecurity, and he's secured all sorts of things, including nuclear power plants. But he works a lot with startups and high growth companies that need to have security compliance. Now, this may, there's some people that are turning out cybersecurity, but this is going to be an interesting conversation because it's about a lot more. And one of the things that I like about Kevin is he's part of the American story. He was first generation American, born and raised in Miami, Florida. And when I asked him, why'd you come on the podcast? He said, I just like sharing knowledge. And and so stay tuned. It's going to be an interesting discussion. Kevin, welcome.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be on here.
Yeah. So it's there's always interesting stories about people. You mentioned your parents are from Colombia. And
Yeah.
I said, you've got to be the first Kevin, the only Kevin I've ever met from Colombia. And I was like, how did you come up with the name Kevin? It's not exactly a Colombian name.
Yeah. But you'd actually be surprised. There's actually a lot of people named Kevin in Colombia. It's funny because so I have a younger sibling as well, and his name is Matthew. So we both have, American names. I mean, we're both first generation here, but like I was mentioning before, there seemed to be a movie, a very popular movie around the time that I was born. Kevin Costner was the lead actor. Don't ask me what movie because I'm not sure what it is. I feel like I have to call my parents right after this podcast to figure it out. But my father was a huge fan of Kevin Costner, still is, and that's how that's how I became Kevin.
Wow. It's fascinating, and and some of it's just what I know of many immigrant stories of the past, just coming to America and falling in love with America, and just assimilating. Not that we're perfect, but there was something, I guess, something here that attracted them here.
Yeah, well, my father was always very, ambitious, knew he always had a dream. The dream was always to come to America. He tried every opportunity, every option that he found. He was lucky enough to get a job with a company in Colombia that placed him in the US. Um, and he moved, he got married to my mother. They moved to Miami. And then, I popped out, 10 months later. And, the rest is history, just because, they decided to stay here. Me and my brother were born here in Miami. And there was no looking back after that.
Yeah. I've been in South Florida more recently, but I think I've only been in Miami once, and that was a long time ago. That was 94. That was fall of 94. And the thing that I loved about it most is I would go into Little Havana and I would get Cuban coffee. And what they would pour to serve like a group of four, I would get for myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at
That
one point, somebody behind the counter said, it's a local gringo.
yeah, that will get you going for sure. If you ever have a, what do you call it, writer's block or anything like that, you have a hard time trying to get back to work, a little cafecito will definitely get you going.
Yeah.
Is for sure.
So yeah, and I still love it. I mean, as we're talking now, I'm drinking a little espresso that I brewed right before our call. So how did you get from Miami to cybersecurity? What was that path?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's always like one of those stories where at the moment, you really didn't know what was going on, right? You just kind of took the next logical best step. And then looking back and you start connecting all the dots, you're just like, wow, this makes total sense of where I am today. I actually never majored in anything technology related. I never really saw myself in anything, technology related. My father was a software engineer, still is. So I saw him like, growing up, just being around computers and all that, never really interested me. So I never really thought I would end up where I am today. I majored in economics. I went to Florida State, just, shy of the Georgia border. And I really thought I was going to become, something of an economist, maybe pursue my MBA, just, you know, having something to do with finance, maybe, or just learning business and finding some type of role within that skill set. But one thing led to another. I met a lot of people in college, met some really good friends who moved to DC after college. There was an opportunity for me to do an internship in Capitol Hill, and I thought, this is my opportunity, right, to kind of start expanding. I was an economics major. Working in government kind of made sense. I was like, maybe I'll end up, somewhere of these large state departments and federal departments where, you're kind of just cranking out data and all this stuff. And very quickly, when I was on Capitol Hill, found out that it wasn't what I wanted. I just thought it was something completely different. Politics is just, for me, just seemed like a mess. Some shady stuff, but, some shady people. It just seemed to me like a kind of like high school all over again, right? So immediately found out that that wasn't for me. And I turned out to leaving Capitol Hill. I ended up working for a large federal contracting firm, consulting firm, and one of the most in demand roles was cybersecurity analyst, just because they were landing a lot of cybersecurity contracts. A lot of the government. This is when like cybersecurity kind of started picking up, back in the 2010s, early 2010s, and I decided to pursue it. I wanted to try out a project. I had someone who pretty much brought me on board, and I really started gaining interest in it. So, long story short, it just became something that I just naturally took, some steps, just things that made sense for me. And then looking back at it, I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense of why I'm here today. But yeah, don't want to bore you with all the extra facts in there. But
Was that the Booz Allen Hamilton? Was that
yeah,
the, yeah, yeah, obviously very big company. It's funny that you said that Capitol Hill seemed like high school all over again. I remember a number of years ago, you know, the control of the House of Representatives changed, and whoever had control, they changed the locks on the in the library so that the other party couldn't get in. I'm like, and I got initially really upset with the folks that did that. And then I realized the same thing had been done in reverse, 2 or 4 years earlier, when Congress was in the other hands. And I remember thinking exactly that same thing. I'm like, you guys are like not even high school. This is like junior high stuff. You guys need to sit in the corner and, think about what you've done.
yeah. They also have the superlatives in there, and they do it once a year. Like best looking, most athletic, right? And then it's a competition, and I just remember vividly seeing people like literally like really try to land those superlatives, and in my head I was just like, man, this just reminds me of school again. Like it is a popularity, contest to a certain extent.
And these people are running their lives.
Yeah, and that was another shocker for me. A lot of the, congressmen had, their teams, right? And a lot of the people who were on these teams, they were very young people, early mid 20s, late 20s. And in my head, I remember thinking like, really, like, you know, kids like fresh out of college are the ones running pretty much the country, because they're the ones, putting together the legislation, right? Communicating it with other congressmen or, other teams, other offices and stuff like that. So in my head, I was quite surprised at how, the back end, how it worked. It's just because you don't really see that unless you're working there. So it was quite an eye opener for me.
Yeah. Well, kind of getting back to the cybersecurity, if you remember back to 2020, I think it was SolarWinds played a role in the biggest hack of computer government computers in history. And it was all tied to an intern that had some easy password that they left out visible on the internet.
Yeah, so I think a common misconception in cybersecurity is, as soon as you say it, people are thinking, the guy in the hoodie, right, in the laptop trying to get into your network. They're trying to crack some, crazy code. But in reality, it's maybe the most simple things that you can think of, right? Like picking up a USB and plugging it into your laptop, when you have no idea what that USB is, probably shouldn't do that. Having the same passwords for all your accounts, right? Like an easy password, something, something, 1, 2, 3, 4, or just, leaving your laptop open, right? Like these things are very simple. And it's usually when you hear about a hack or a breach, it's something when you find out what the source was, you're like, for real, like that's how that happened? That's crazy. So it goes to say security or cybersecurity is a lot about human interaction with computers, right? So at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're trying to change a culture and you're dealing directly with humans. You're not necessarily, thinking about how to fortify, I mean, you are fortify your network, fortify your laptop, but at the end of the day, computers only do what humans tell them to do up to this point, right? I mean, you have AI now, who knows what kind of mess we're going to get into with that, but you the human ultimately is the one who dictates what's going to happen, right? So a lot of it has to do with human psychology, with how they interact with computers and the digital life. So it's pretty interesting. And once I heard that from somebody, and once someone told me that, I was like, this makes a lot of sense. That's the way I look at it. Now, um, now. So it's really interesting.
I mean, some of the horror stories that I've heard, and I've seen lists like, the top 10 lists of passwords, and like one of the top 10 passwords is password 123 or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, it's the oldest, the oldest trick in the book, I guess. Like a lot of people just use the 1, 2, 3. They do it to keep it memorized. I mean, I used to do that as well. Now, like once a year, I mean, I have a password manager now. Once a year, I go back and I check, all my passwords, making sure, none of them are duplicates, just because if you learn one, right, or you find one, or you're able to crack one, most likely that person is using it for, who knows how many accounts, 20, 30 accounts. It might be your bank account, how you pay your taxes, log into IRS and all this stuff. So like it could be pretty damaging, right, for a person if they're not carefully um choosing their passwords and using the right applications to just maintain that password manager.
I can sort of understand for individuals, but I can't understand why businesses in 2024 haven't mandated that all of their employees use a password manager.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to get, it might be easier when you have a small company, right? 5 persons, 10 persons, or 10 people. But if you have a large organization with, 300, 500 people, how do you get everyone on board, right? Like how do you verify that everyone's using that? And that's just the nature of the game, just getting everyone on board, understanding that security it's a culture, right? It's a culture that you have to integrate into your business, and you have to consistently, follow up on it. It's not just, clicking through those security awareness training where you just like, oh God, I have to do this again. I just did this 6 months ago. It's more of, sending the security awareness training, making sure that they're going through it, maybe sending, once a month an email being like, hey, this is why we ask you to do this stuff. That's very important. Here's a specific use case, maybe an article or something like that. So it's just the consistency of teaching or just awareness for your organization.
Now, you've helped nuclear plants uh, dial in their cybersecurity.
Yeah.
I mean, that's intriguing. What's that look like? What are they worried about? What are the threats? And
Yeah, so the critical infrastructure of the US or just throughout the world is very important to safeguard. I don't know if you've heard, but I think maybe a little over a year ago, there was an incident where a hacker got into like the water system of Tampa or something like that. And they literally had the option of mixing in like the dirty water with the clean water, and that literally gets sent to the whole city, right? And if people start drinking this dirty water, they can obviously, there's complications, people can die. So like critical infrastructure is super important. It's very important for, national security. You don't want to cause chaos if, there's a blackout for the entire US or the southeast region of the US. Um, I mean, this is how wars are started, right? So it's extremely important, right, to safeguard the energy, right, for the US, the water for the US, the roads, right, trains, all these things. It's a lot more like you know it's there, but you don't necessarily think about it, right? Like, okay, what happens if highways shut down, right? Or what happens if a nuclear plant were to shut down? Like, how many, how many cities would go out? What implications would that have for, hospitals, schools, all these types of things. So extremely important. I know it's like one of the largest efforts right now for the government to just make sure they're safeguarding the entire critical infrastructure of the US, just because you have large governments, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, who literally fund teams, back in the countries to just all day just try to hack into, the most critical infrastructures in the US or the rest of the Western world. So it's very important to have those safeguards in place.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people that are listening who say, hey, I don't have a nuclear plant. I'm not, the government, I'm not a big company. I don't need to worry about this. I'm not a threat. Nobody cares about me.
Yeah, yeah, that's also, a misconception. It's not a problem until it is, right? I mean, I've heard of HVAC companies that use technology for their HVAC. I've heard of them get hacked, right? Where basically their whole clientele, it gets shut down just because the tech that they're utilizing, they can't turn on the AC, they can't lower the temperature, they can't hide the temperature, they can't do anything, right? So like it's a lot more prevalent than you think it is, especially if you're hosting. You should mainly think about it like, what type of data am I hosting? Do I have customers who give me emails, addresses, social security number? If that's a thing, then you should definitely be thinking about, security. But at the end of the day, if it's not, sensitive information, it also is more of a brand reputation, right? That you want to safeguard. Just think about law firms that, big law firms that, there's a lot of clients that trust a lot of information with these law firms. And law firms are targeted a lot. And then, you have a hacker come in and just get access to all the data of, I don't know, subpoenas, or I'm not a lawyer, but like, very sensitive information that you don't want out there. And they just start releasing this information little by little, unless you pay them, a crazy amount on ransomware, to get that information back. Or, none of that's guaranteed either, where, your data's held for ransom, you pay the ransom, and then you don't even get the data back because there's no guarantee that you're going to get the data back. So I mean, there's been numerous cases like that as well. So it's just there's a lot to factor in, but then the majority of the reasons why customers come to us is because they're either trying to land, a customer, a large customer, and then within those contracts, they have certain clauses that are asking them to follow, some type of framework, security framework, and you also need to demonstrate that. So that's why the main reason why a lot of customers come to us.
Yeah. And I think there's going to be more movement that way. A few years ago, I was sitting in a room with one of the top insurers in the country that provide cyber liability insurance. And at the time, they were saying when one of their clients gets ransomed, they just pay the ransom. I'm like, well, that's just going to drive everything up. And so I asked him, I said, what are you guys doing to change that? And what I've heard more recently is to get cyber liability insurance, you have to show that you've done certain due diligence.
Exactly. Yeah. So people don't put that much emphasis on security right now, cybersecurity, and it's understandable. I get it because it's new, right?
Yeah.
It's not new, but it's new, right? Like a lot of people are just beginning to understand the importance of it, especially post COVID, right? A lot of people started moving remote. You really have to start figuring out, hey, how do we keep this? How do we keep our data safe? Everyone's all over the place. We don't know who has access to what. So yes, a lot of the, implementation, a lot of due diligence is you want cyber insurance, you need to demonstrate this, right? You want to land this contract. We want to protect our reputation. So you need to demonstrate that the data that we're giving you, you're protecting it. So there's a lot of that now for sure. And it's just going to become more and more current, right? So that you're going to see that a lot.
Yeah. And I think one of the most interesting ransom cases I'd heard was a dry cleaner got ransomed. Not a
Mm.
big chain, it was just a lone dry cleaner. And if you think about it, they have thousands of garments there where the locations are stored on computer. So they had people showing up. Something as simple as a dry cleaner
Yeah.
wasn't able to get people their garments because their computers were ransomed and they didn't know where the garments were.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously there's a lot more organizations, companies, different types of industries that are becoming more and more digitized. They're moving, to like AWS, they're moving up to the cloud, they're storing all their information, you know, up to the cloud. And that's just becoming, as soon as you have anything that's digitized, that's when you have to start thinking about, okay, are we safe? Or can one incident just cause me to go bankrupt and have to shut my business down? So it's not to be dramatic, I think a lot of cybersecurity marketing is like fear driven. We try to stay away from that just because we don't, we're not here to scare people. It's just more like, hey, look at all the possibilities that can happen. Just make sure that, you're following these 3, 4 steps, right? To just drastically reduce your risk.
You bring up a really interesting point. I'm a marketer and I've, marketed cyber liability insurance, and it really does feel like you have to scare the crap out of people. I'm like, that's not how I want to make a living, scaring people. So what do you find that's effective in terms of moving people to take the right actions?
We focus most on money because that is at the bottom line. A lot of people think about, are you either going to make me money or are you going to save me money? So we really try to find kind of return on investment calculators, which we're working on now. It's still hard to pinpoint exactly like, hey, we can completely miss, a few ransomware attacks. This is going to save you this amount of money, or we flip it the other way around where it's, you have you've lost out on 3 or 4 contracts over the past year because you don't have these things in place. Just think about how much more customers you can land if you have, these 5 things in place. That's going to cost you this versus the contracts that you're landing. You can pay this off in, half a contract or something like that. So tying it to money has worked the best for us, even though it's not, you know, the ideal way that we want to sell either. But we figured, if we get our foot in the door, that's when we can start really the buyer awareness process, right? So like we're introducing, a few concepts, we're introducing why we're including these concepts and why it's important, maybe a few possible scenarios of why we need to include this or what's the worst that can happen. But it just gives us like an in, right, to kind of just do the educational part.
Yeah. Yeah. So at some point you left Booz Allen and you were later with Deloitte. And real quick, as we wrap up, what led you to start your own firm, and what's been kind of your biggest lesson in that journey?
Yeah, I always knew I wanted to do something on my own. My father is entrepreneur, like he He started his own consulting firm as well, you know, a software engineer. I've seen, you know, I mean, I've seen many ups and downs, right, for a business like that, but it just gave me, you know, gives me the courage, right, to go ahead and start my own thing. I just know that, I mean, that's the American dream, right? You come to America, you're able to start a life, you know, able to start whatever business you want and really try to excel in it because there's just so many opportunities for for one person, right? So I've always wanted to, I see this as a way of giving back for me as well, just because, you know, I'm also creating jobs. I'm also being able to bring, you know, some people on board, maybe that I can also coach as well, just give them the tools to just really tell them like, hey, this is something you also want to do, like just learn from my mistakes, right? Or just learn from like what we're doing here. And then, you know, there's no doubt in my mind that you can, you know, go out and excel in what you're doing as well. So it gives me a lot of, you know, there's a lot of passion for me in this, especially, you know, when I'm bringing on a lot of team members. It motivates me, right, to not just excel career wise, but also seeing that I'm making an impact on other people, other families as well. So it's it was my way of finding like my why. And it's been, I mean, we've only been live for a year and a half, but it's, you know, every day I do wake up motivated. Like I mentioned to you, I just got married, you know, a week ago. I was out of work for 2 weeks, and you know, I woke up on Monday just being really excited. I was like, I'm ready to tackle. I'm ready to seize the day. I'm ready to seize the rest of the year, and I'm just excited. I'm excited for, you know, what's coming for us, what's coming for, you know, my teammates, my family, all that. So it's a lot of upside for us.
That's awesome. One, congratulations on your marriage. And and I think it's, you know, I think it's good for leaders to step away from work at time and see what happens when you're gone.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
chance
and
for
I,
people to step up and chance for you to find out what's working and what's not.
yeah, and I have no complaints. I just everything was handled beautifully. I purposely, you know, I kind of want to see that how that worked as well. And I just think the team that I have for sure is just they understand, right? Just because we really try to mesh the culture that we're looking for, right? We try to find the cultural fit for everybody who's joining us. We very early on we try to explain like what the objective is for the company, that we only work for the company. We're not really necessarily working for the CEO or the founder. We're all collectively trying to build something together. And it really depends on all of us. It's not just one person. So it's resonated very well.
That's awesome. Well, Kevin, how can people reach you?
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, Kevin Barona. I try to be active on Twitter as well. It doesn't work as well for me, but LinkedIn is definitely the way to go. And then if anyone wants to reach out, also our website, cycoresecure.com. Um, those are probably the best ways.
Excellent. Yeah, and we'll have those links in the show notes. Well, Kevin, thanks for coming on Leaders and Legacies.
Thanks, Craig.